you can see the bone here, and these are actually the outlines, the digital outline that I drew around the damaged regions, and then I lettered each one of them. So starting with A, that I determined was a cause from a stabbing type action. Over to B here, which was a chopping type action, and then C and D, chopping type action.
Okay. Now turning your attention to State's Exhibit 180B.
If it's possible, could I just focus on the top image? I mean, for now.
All right, so with regard to State's Exhibit 180B, this top image, what does that show?
This is region A, which I said was caused from a stabbing action. You can see here I've actually written on the bone A, and then next to it is my initials DJH. The illustrations, I have those there essentially to kind of outline the damage that was occurred to the bone.
So this image is a close-up of image, or what was marked as tool mark A in the previous photo. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
And the reason I took the close-up image is what I was trying to do is I was trying to document the damage that occurred to the bone. It's a little difficult to see here, but you could actually see some of the bone here has begun to fracture, and the force of the impact came down at a perpendicular angle. So this fracturing that's occurring here has been driven into the bone. The bone actually has a hard layer, and there's a hollow layer inside. So this penetrated that hard layer into the hollow layer, and actually I don't capture it here, but there was damage that was occurred onto the other side of the bone that was occurred from here. What's not captured on the screen is the arrow right here. There's actual radial cracks coming out of the damaged area right here that I was trying to actually document in this photograph.
And what other actions did you take in reviewing or analyzing tool mark A on this hip bone?
Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, first half of my examination is focused on those class characteristics. The second half, I'm wanting to actually identify those individual characteristics. I was examining it, looking for those individual characteristics. I was unable to locate any. So that's when I decided to use the casting material. Again, this that silicone-based compound, kind of comes with thick liquid. I applied it into the damaged area, allowed it to harden, removed it. I actually did this 2 times, and I was unable to identify any individual characteristics from this damaged area.
Is there a light on here? Because that image is, yeah, I'm trying to make it lighter. Oh, thank you. That bottom image is a little dark. Are you able to see that?
I can.
Okay. And what is that bottom image, if you can describe it for the record?
It is the same image as the one that was at the top. However, it's just more focused. Or, sorry, the magnification was increased. It just illustrates the fracturing that occurred and that bone being carried inside the damaged area. So essentially just a magnified version of the first photograph that you saw.
Thank you. Now, looking at State's Exhibit 180C, the top picture, can you describe this for the record?
Right. The damaged area is here. Again, you can see the identifier I gave it, B, my initials, and the arrow is just kind of outlining the fractures that occurred. You can see some of the fracturing of the bone that's occurring. It's being driven downward. This again came from a chopping tap action. The energy of that long axis of that blade is being driven down. This appears to have come from a perpendicular angle. It didn't drive into the all the way through the hard layer of the bone, but right here you can see basically part of the bone, the harder, being driven inside that damaged area. I did take castings from this as well. I took 2 casts trying to identify individual characteristics. From my examination process, I was unable to identify any individual characteristics from this injury.
Did you know anything else is significant with this tool mark identified as B?
No,
Okay. Did you take any other actions in reviewing or analyzing it?
no, I did not.
Okay. And then with regard to the bottom image on State's Exhibit 180C, can you please explain what we are seeing there?
Essentially, it's the same image as the first one, just magnified, so you can actually see the B here. But what I was wanting to illustrate is you could actually see, again, this injury did not pierce through the hard layer of the bone, so you can actually see at the base of that tool mark residual bone fragments that were carried into it. So that was what I was trying to illustrate with that image.
All right, now in State's Exhibit 180D, there are multiple images on this page. So if we can just start at the top, does this contain close-up images of the tool marks you noted as C and D in that very first photograph?
They do.
All right. And why did you take a closer-up picture of the tool marks you identified as C and D?
I was just trying to better capture the damage to document it in these images.
All right. What did you know as significant with these tool marks?
Okay. Looking at the top left image, you can again see how I've labeled them C and D. Again, my initials, DJH. The green arrow, I use it to illustrate that this was a chopping type action, and that the force of this chopping type action, at least in this image, occurred from left to right.
Okay. And when you talk about chopping type actions, are you able to identify the type of tools in any of these marks that we've looked at that leave these?
I wasn't able to identify it to a particular tool, but there were tool types that I was actually able to speculate could have caused these marks that are essentially chopping tap action are terms I would use was consistent with certain types of tools.
And what are those tools?
In this type of chopping tap action, as I have stated in my report, it would be from a bladed tool, such as a cleaver, machete, and I believe a hatchet I used.
Thank you. Is there anything else that you need to note on the top 2 images?
There is on the top right. Again, you can kind of see my initials right here. So what I did was I just focused inward onto this, onto the damaged area, and you can see this crack occurring right here. It illustrates basically that the force came from this side, and it drove or fractured part of this bone, and it's kind of driving it inside that damaged area. As you may be able to see, this damage cut through the hard layer of the bone, and it actually transferred to the other side of the bone as well. The black arrows here on the right side, they're illustrating basically scallop-shaped surfaces that were found along the tool mark, which indicate to me that there may have been some type of serrated teeth on the blade to produce those. Those are actually easier to see, if we can. So see right here, this cut or this chopping type action either didn't cut through the hard surface of that bone, but it carried a lot of material into it. You see the black arrow actually pointing out these teeth structures kind of coming out. I believe that bladed tool had some type of serrated teeth on it, kind of like saw teeth, like you see on saw. And as it was being delivered through a chopping type action, caused those to flare up. And then you can see the green arrow here, which indicates that the force came from, at least in the image, from left to right.
Thank you. Now looking at State's Exhibit 180E, the top image on that, what does that show?
I'm sorry, could I clarify one more point from the last image?
Sure, let me grab that one again. The bottom? Do you want the bottom?
The only thing I want to mention is when I went in and I was looking for those individual characteristics, I was unable to find them in either C or D.
Okay. All right, so looking at State's Exhibit 180E, there are two images on this page. The top image, what is that documenting?
This is the same bone, item 16. This is just the back side of the bone.
Okay, and why did you take a picture of the back side of the bone with these marks on it?
As I mentioned earlier, the tool marks that I identified on the front side, A and D, I said some of that damage was transferred onto the back side. So region A, as I mentioned earlier, that was from a stabbing type action, and that damage transferred through the bone. So that damage actually carried through the two hard layers and didn't necessarily come out of the bone, but fractured it so that that tool partially pushed that or ejected that material onto the outside of the bone here. Region D.
And Mr. Halepaska, if I can just interrupt, are you able to say what type of tool would make that stab mark identified in Mark A?
I believe it was some type of bladed tool, so like a knife. However, I couldn't preclude other tools that might have some type of pointed edge, because you can imagine even a cleaver, if it's delivered on not the long axis of the blade, but one of the corners, may have been able to produce this. But this is consistent with a bladed tool such as a knife.
And what else did you notice significant on this bone?
That D here, that was that chopping type action that I talked about earlier on the front side. I told you some of that damage was transferred onto the back, and you can actually see how it pierced through both the hard layer of the bone on the other side, traveled through that hollow part of the inside, and then partially out on the outside. And then E was another tool mark that I identified. It is consistent with a chopping type action, and it did appear to have serrated, or was produced from a blade that had serrated tool marks. And the force of the blow, as illustrated here with this green arrow, traveled from left to right.
All right, and the bottom, well, I don't want to change that because the green arrow. The bottom image on State's Exhibit 180E, what is that of?
This is a close-up of E right here, and you can see I actually wrote E in my initials. The green arrow illustrates the direction of the action that occurred. And then right here, the black arrows are just illustrating it. You can see these teeth-like structures that are kind of coming out of the bone. Again, most consistently produced with a bladed type tool that has serrated teeth.
Did you take any other actions in reviewing the tool marks A, D, or E?
Yes, I did. I just made observations to identify any individual characteristics if they existed within those tool marks. I was unable to identify any of those individual characteristics.
Okay. Looking at State's Exhibit 180F. What portion of the bone does this depict?
That is an intact portion of the spine.
And why did you take a picture of the mark labeled as, I believe it's labeled as A in Exhibit 180F?
Okay, so this is item 17. So what I did was I just started over the count. So this is A for item 17. The tool mark here is produced from a chopping type action. As the green arrow indicates, the force of the blow, as far as this illustration is concerned, came from the bottom up.
What did you notice significant with this tool mark?
It didn't travel through the hard layer of that bone. It's difficult to see in the image, but this is not a flat surface. This portion of the bone right here,
Oh, sorry.
yeah, is kind of coming out. So this portion here is much higher in elevation than this tool mark.
All right, and what other actions did you take in reviewing or analyzing tool mark A on this portion of the spine?
Just that I was trying to identify any individual characteristics within that tool mark, and I was unable to find any.
Okay. And with regard to the bottom image on State's Exhibit 180F, what is that?
It's just the same image, just magnified. And it just illustrates, or you better see that how the tool mark or the tool used didn't pierce that hard layer, and that you can actually see fractures or pieces of the bone that were actually carried into it.
And State's Exhibit 180G. What item was this identified as by your lab?
This was labeled as item 19.
Okay, and what portion of the bone does this depict?
It is the other half of the hip or pelvic region.
So this is a different portion of the hip bone or pelvic region than was identified in item 16, correct?
That is correct.
And can you walk us through your analysis of this bone with the marked areas?
Okay. Would there be some, if we could actually bring down some of that brightness?
Let me see.
We can't, right?
The light off.
Oh.
Does that help?
Yes, that's perfect. So I'll start from the left side here. D is was created from a chopping type action. That damage from the blow actually pierced that hard layer of the bone. Next to it is E. F here, which is kind of difficult to see. You can see it. But what I'm trying to outline here, and you can actually see it, there's a, well, before I go into that, one of the things I wanted to also show you was there was what I believe were soot marks along here. So part of the bone was damaged, I believe, due to fire. But right here, F, you can kind of see these fracturing kind of coming around here, this little region right there. I was unable to find any tool marks, but it did appear that some type of force was applied to it, which I used as compressive force. Force down on it here, perpendicular, kind of driving this fragment downward, but it was still attached to the bone. Over here on the right, G, you can kind of see this outline here. I was unable to identify any types of class characteristics from it, other than the fact that some type of force was applied onto it, and it just drove in there. And in H, right here, in this, all these G, D, and E, if I didn't mention, were from a chopping type action. I'm sorry, G was compressive force, D and E, chopping type action. H, that was from a stabbing type action. You can, it's difficult to see, but you see this little channel here. It appears that something was driven into that, and it caused a channel to occur within that hard surface of the bone.
And with regard to the compression action, are you able to tell what type of tool was used?
No, I was not.
And with the other, I think you said, chopping type actions, are you able to identify what type of tool was used?
Not identify, but tool marks are consistent with. Would it be possible for me to save that when we do the close-up images?
Sure.
I think it would be easier to illustrate.
Absolutely. States Exhibit 180H. There are three images on this page. Do you recognize those?
Yes, I do.
And with regard to the top photograph, can you just explain that for the record?
You can see the digital box I drew around the tool mark. It kind of looks like a tooth mark, or kind of like a shark's tooth standing up here. The green arrow is based on the top of it. Here's the base. Right here, I actually wrote on the bone A in my initials. What's hard to see in this image is there's more elevation right here. So this occurred from a chopping type action. As the green arrow indicates, it came from the top down. But since this bone was protruding out, had higher elevation, that chopping type action did not cut into the hard layer of that bone. And also I reviewed it for individual characteristics and found none. I believe tools consistent with potentially making this kind of marks would be from a blade tool such as a cleaver, machete, hatchet, or similar type tools.
Did you note anything else as significant with regard to these tool marks on this top photograph?
For B and C, I wasn't able to identify any class characteristics, and I just referred to them as fractures. You can see that the bone, some type of force was occurred onto it, and it actually fractured that bone here as well. It may have occurred from the same impact, but I wasn't able to determine that. And I was unable to determine any kind of tools that would be consistent with making that type of damage.
Thank you. With regard to the bottom images, why did you take a closer up picture of those?
Those are just zoomed in images of B and C, just to better illustrate the fracturing that occurred to the bone. So you can actually see how the bone is cracking and fracturing, and you got bone that's spurring out from that pelvic bone.
What other actions, if any, did you take in reviewing or analyzing these tool marks identified on this bone?
Other than just trying to identify any of those individual characteristics, which I was unable to locate any.
Okay. And then turning to State's Exhibit I. What does that top photo depict?
Okay, so you can see part of my initials here, but just to make sure that I actually wrote on my notes. So that is D, my initials, scribbled, and then the date. But what this image illustrates here is a close-up of damage to region D. As I indicated earlier, it's from a chopping type action. The force of the action occurred, at least in the image, from left to right, kind of coming upward. What this illustrates is you can see the fracturing that's occurring from the bone right here, where basically the force of the blow carried over this portion and underneath this side. It cleaved through the hard layer of that bone.
All right. Did you notice anything else of significance or take any other actions in reviewing or analyzing this tool mark noted as D on this portion of the bone?
I also was looking for the individual characteristics, which I was unable to find any.
Okay. And on the bottom photograph, can you describe that for the record?
Okay. So this is D in its entirety, and next to it is E. Here is F. As you recall, that's the one I said I couldn't find any class characteristics, though some type of force, compressive force, was administered on it at this point, which kind of caused it to fracture along this area here. But what I want you to focus on is E. E right here. It's the same kind of action coming from left to right, a chopping type action. However, there were what appeared to be teeth-like protrusions coming out of it that are consistent with a chopping type action from a tool with serrated teeth. This one did not pierce through the hard layer of the bone.
And did you take any other actions or find anything else of note in analyzing the tool marks identified as D, E, and F in this photograph?
The only other actions I took was just to try to identify individual characteristics. Was unable to locate any.
Thank you. State's Exhibit 180J. And can you walk me through the marks that you have on this larger picture first?
Yes. So this is a G. You can see right here I've written on the bone, G, my initials. You could kind of see the outline of the impressed mark. As I mentioned earlier, I was unable to associate any class characteristics with it other than some type of compressive force was applied to it to cause this impression to occur. Up here at the top, H, this came from a stabbing type action. This was the one from the first illustration I talked about that a little channel had been formed underneath the hard layer of the bone. You could actually see this is the orifice of it. It is pretty small. I actually hand wrote on it. It's approximately 0.058 of an inch in diameter, so pretty small.
What else did you find noteworthy regarding the tool marks observed on this portion of the hip bone?
I attempted to take a cast, so this was my final cast of the casting material. I applied it hoping to capture some kind of class, maybe even individual characteristics. I was unable to do that. Can I speak to the other images on the right?
Yes, that's going to be my next question. With regard to the top right photograph, what is this closer image of?
So that is just a closer image of H right here. I just kind of zoomed into it just so you can kind of see. Here's the orifice. The green arrow indicates the force of the blow occurred here, and you can see behind it some of that channel that occurred from underneath that hard portion of the bone. And again, my initials.
Did you take any other actions or find anything else significant with regard to this puncture type mark on the bone?
I did not.
Okay. Regarding the lower image, why did you take a closer image of the tool mark identified, I think, as G in that portion of the hip bone?
I just wanted to illustrate it. It was all the images I took up until that time. It was very difficult to see it in image. So all I did here was I was just casting different lights. And so I just kind of casted a shadow so you're kind of able to better see that outline of that damaged region. So that was my motivation behind actually trying to take that image or taking that image.
Thank you. Did you take any other actions or find anything else worth mentioning in analyzing these tool marks?
No, I did not.
States Exhibit 180K. This appears to be an overview of all three bones that you analyzed. Is that right?
That is correct.
And what's significant in this image?
This is the only image, or one of two images I have from my notes that illustrate all the bones in an illustration. So it basically provides you the totality of the tool marks that were imparted onto these bones. On the left side, you can see right here I wrote item 19. So this whole bone here is item 19. Item 17 is the portion of the spine. Item 16 is this portion right here. And all I did was I just illustrated in it all the different locations. So tool mark A, B, A, and then of course along here.
And can you point out any of the images that you were able to identify either class or individual characteristics for the tool marks?
So for any kind of chopping type action, I didn't identify any tools, but I determined tools that are consistent in class characteristics as causing, in this case, a chopping type action. That would be A here, chopping type action. A on item 17, chopping action. D and C, chopping type action, as well as B on item 16. Item 16, A